Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Nossum University's celebration of Earth Day. I'm Dr. Elaine Blacklock. I've been a pediatrician in Sudbury for more than 20 years, and I am now also Nossum University's Planetary Health Lead, the first one ever, which is a wonderful thing indeed. Every day seems to bring more news about the ill health of our planet. News that could make us feel sad or angry or even guilty. But today is a day for celebrating our planet's magnificence and the remarkable ways in which Earth supports our well-being, our health, and our thriving. It's also a day for reminding ourselves that we are interdependent and interconnected with all life on this planet, and for renewing our commitment to protect nature and the Earth systems that sustain us. Today, I'm wearing a t-shirt given to me by Dr. Nell Thomas from Minden. On the front, it says, "My legacy is your destiny." And on the back, it says, "That's why I'm your climate hero." For any of us who are of a certain age, I don't know what age that is, over 30, over 40, over 50, we have to remember that we're leaving a legacy for younger generations. And our legacy is indeed the destiny of the children and the young people of today. So I'm joining this event personally from Niagara-on-the-Lake. The Niagara region is situated on treaty land with a rich history of First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Amanda, if you could put up Nossum University's land acknowledgement for me, and I'll just read that for you. As we gather across Northern Ontario on this Earth Day, let's acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands in Northern Ontario, and we're thankful to the First Nations, the Métis and Inuit people who have stewarded this land for generations. We recognize their enduring connection to this place and express our gratitude for their ongoing care and protection of the earth. A year ago, Nossum University signed the Academic Health Institution's Declaration on Planetary Health. And at the time, I wrote a rather audacious opinion piece in the Sudbury Star and other Northern Ontario papers proclaiming that planetary health has arrived at Nossum. Well, before that and since then, the university has made some significant progress. I took over the Action Committee on Climate Change in August of 22, and already there had been work done. People like Mariana Reid out on the island had worked hard on disconnecting the academic advancement of our faculty from the need for international travel to conferences. And the second thing that had been done was the Nossum University Travel Pledge. And this, I want to give it some publicity. It's fairly well publicized amongst Nossum staff and full-time faculty, but what we need is more engagement on this from all of our clinical faculty when it comes to planning conferences, when it comes to planning meetings, and how much travel we could avoid, and hence the carbon emissions that go with that. Because one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions coming from Nossum University is travel. And this is inherent in our distributed approach to education. Now, we have been giving some thought to other things as well. Just recently, the committee passed a motion, a recommendation to the university, and provided the university with a good food environment guide, which is going to hopefully result in policies on food and catering services throughout all university venues, and shift catering in the direction of food that's both healthy for people and sustainable for the planet. So that is just a very recent accomplishment, hot off the press. There's also a lot of work being done on infusing NOSM's undergraduate medical education curriculum with planetary health principles and knowledge. And that's an ongoing process. It requires time and the hard work of many people because it's got to be sort of infused into pre-existing lectures, pre-existing study groups, pre-existing case-based learning, and of course, clinical teaching on the wards and in the clinics. So it's an ongoing process, but it's well underway. Another thing we've been giving thought to are making recommendations on NOSM's investment strategies. And you may have heard that, some universities have actually divested, for example, from fossil fuels. We really want to be creative about this, and I'm hoping that today's speakers are really going to lend some momentum to that process. So we all know that addressing climate change and the other environmental crises we face is going to require massive changes at systemic and structural levels, at corporate levels, at government levels, locally and provincially and nationally and globally. But it's also going to require that we as individuals start rethinking how we live on our planet. You may have heard that if you want to reduce your personal carbon footprint, the most effective steps would be to shift in the direction of plant-rich eating, to use active and public transportation where possible, to drive less in smaller, low or zero emission vehicles, and to fly only when it's truly necessary. But today I want to open your minds a bit to another possible way that you can make a perhaps even more significant difference. Our speakers are going to help us understand how we can reduce our environmental impact by using our financial investments to contribute to positive social and environmental outcomes in the world. So I want to be sure we leave time for questions at the end, so I'm going to proceed with introducing our three speakers with brief bios. First, we have Jean-François Desmarais, who is a Northern Ontario entrepreneur, financial innovator, and sustainable investing advocate, who has a really profound ethical commitment. And he's become a leading voice in the realm of socially responsible investing. He's here in Sudbury. Mr. Keegan Leahy is a First Nations financial consultant with extensive international experience. He's the founder of the Turtle Island Foundation, which is a global nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of the world's Indigenous communities through economic development and reconciliation. Keegan used the pandemic years to complete not one, but 2 master's degrees, and he's now working on a PhD in sustainable finance. So he has tons of experience to bring to us today. Julie Nichols is a Sudbury local. She has many years of experience as a certified financial planner, and she brings a tireless commitment to ethical investing and diversity to her work with her clients. So without further delay, I'd like to turn things over to Jean-François.
Thank you kindly, Dr. Blacklock. I'll get our presentation started here. Okay. Dr. Blacklock, can you confirm that you can see this okay? Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking some time on this Earth Hour to join us to discuss investing for impact. The title of today's presentation is Driving Positive Change Through Your Portfolio. So really appreciate everyone joining us today. Let's get started. All right, agenda for today, we've got sustainable finance. So Keegan Leahy, our subject matter expert, will get us started with a broad level overview of the movement, where we're at today, some of the key terms and some of the pitfalls of investing with your portfolio or driving change with your portfolio and your personal finance. I'll bring us in the middle of the funnel to how do we effectuate change within the portfolio, what are the decisions and things that you can look for inside the actual investments. And then finally, Julie Nichols, certified financial planner, will guide us through in your everyday life, how can you bring about change and what are the things that you should be doing to drive a change within the environmental movement. So to get us started, I'm very happy to welcome Keegan Leahy. You've heard his bio. As an Indigenous person, everything that Keegan does involves an element of sustainability to it. And so it's my great pleasure to welcome him as our first speaker.
Miigwech, JF. Happy to be here. I thought I'd start out with a quick side note that as an Indigenous person, my mother is actually the first female Indigenous family practice doctor in Canada, and she went through the NOSM program so many, many years ago. So I'm very happy and excited to be here and be able to present to all you on my path that I've been through. So working in finance and banking and now into the sustainable finance world. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit today is a very, very broad overview of the world of sustainable finance. What is it? What are some of the key areas in which being discussed and operated in? How it came about briefly, and how do we measure this from a quantifiable aspect for investment management and corporate governance. So with that, next slide. So, as a result of the world path as it is on right now with climate change, the UN had decided to create the Principles of Responsible Investing. This was circa 2006. And with that, they created 6 of these pillars, 6 of these commitments, areas in which corporations and entities would sign on and say that this is what we're planning to do, how we're going to operate our businesses to be better global participants. I won't go into so much detail going over each one, but they're essentially saying that we're committed to operating positively. And now the UN has their PRIs, as the Principles of Responsible Investing is referred to, but many corporations have adopted their own more extensive versions of the PRIs, of which I've helped write a few of. But that leads to the next area, the sub area of responsible investing. And that's the term that I think a lot of people may have heard of one way or another, and that is ESG and SRI. So obviously, what is ESG? It stands for environmental, social, and governance. 3 areas in which institutions and investors can evaluate a company's commitment to the PRIs and commitment to being positive members of society. So the first, obviously, being environmental. This is everything that we think of. This is the climate. How do we impact the climate? How do we operate more efficiently as individuals and as companies? And the list kind of goes on down the path there as far as environmental aspects. The next area of that we look at is social. So one of the companies many years ago, before globalization, were very big parts of the community. They employed most of the town and smaller towns. They utilized local resources and so on. Nowadays, in a global society, we want to go back to, how do companies better engage with their communities like they once did, but in a global society. So this looks at areas whereas, like, say, human rights, equity, inclusion, data production, and so on. So that's another metric that we look at. And then finally, governance. This is how companies are managed, governed. So, but we look at aspects such as executive compensation, how do they operate with when it comes to whistleblowers, and what does the board look like? I mean, are they diverse? Are they balanced? All these aspects, all 3 of these areas, environmental, social, and governance, can be quantified. So, so that gets us to the next slide. So, given the fact that this ESG boom, sustainable finance boom, has really just started pretty much 2019, when BlackRock decided to say that we're doing a massive shift in our investment philosophy, and that was to look at sustainable finance investing. And why is this? sustainable finance, businesses that invest with the ESG values in mind have been proven to be long-term profit positive. So how has this come about? So everything is coming together pretty quickly right now, led by the SASB. But as you see on the chart here, we have an organization called the IFRS. This is an accounting body that now is getting into ranking ESG scoring, a company's commitment. So, so who uses this? So investment managers use this. Uh, corporate evaluation bodies. They use it internally as well. So institutions like Morningstar, Bloomberg, and MSCI, as you see there, will utilize these when they are analyzing their a company's performance. Next slide. So to kind of close out, so with every good positive effort, there are always bad actors, bad players, and when we're doing due diligence, you need to be able to identify people that are cheating, people are not have the best intentions. So two of the key areas here in which one you've probably heard of, greenwashing, and the other being astroturfing. Both of them are not new. Many of these terms have been these actions have been around for a while, but they have newer names. So greenwashing obviously is stuff like clean coal. You can't just put the word clean or green or eco in front of something and all of a sudden, boom, you are what you say you are. So you need to be able to dig deeper and say, all right, why is this? Why substantiate what you're saying? And that's through why these ESG metrics are coming about, to be able to quantify and say, are you really doing that? Outside bodies are evaluating you. You're evaluating yourself, but most people aren't going to trust you until someone else says you. A couple examples here are Starbucks, and there are others that jumped on here, but Starbucks in particular, when they decided to shift to be more green, they decided to go to their strawless lids. When their strawless lids actually use more plastics and have a much more negative impact than the previous straw and lid combo before. Also, everyone knows Coca-Cola as well. Coca-Cola, I think a lot of people have a pretty positive image on, whether they like it or not. I think people feel like they are good stewards of the environment. They're good companies, but the fact is that they are the largest polluter of plastic in the world. When you think about their global reach and the amount of plastic bottles they use for not only their soft drinks, but the bottled water that they have. Now I'm going on to astroturfing. Astroturfing is fake grass. So anyone that's been out to baseball games before or football games, you can probably usually tell the difference, but you got to look closely. So in a modern sense, this is fake news. This is to spread a disinformation. This is examples like, say, the bots on social media, the comments that are just positive upon positive upon positive, something that I think if anyone used their common sense would be able to say, this doesn't sound like it should be having as much support as it does. But more so, these are these bad actors that are coming forward, and they're actually creating these campaigns, these fake grassroots campaigns that build up momentum. You see that a lot during politics, election years. You see this a lot when, say, organizations that are typically dirty will put on these side campaigns to make it sound like they're legitimate, but they're really not. So some examples there are Walmart, Exxon, and Koch. They have often had some bad news or bad press. So they decided that with their power and their capital reach, they're going to create these side movements that will essentially distract them from what they're doing. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm going to allow JF to kind of compress and funnel down this speech into something a little bit more down to earth. Chimigwich.
Thank you, Keegan. I appreciate your perspective on this. From my own perspective, I'd like to chat about on the investments, how can we make sure that we're avoiding some of the pitfalls that Keegan mentioned there while leveraging and empowering the best and most responsible stewards within our portfolio. So I want to just share with you a story. My journey into socially responsible investing started about 8 years ago, as many stories do within the world of investment, when a client started to ask and this client started to request for a little bit more information on what we were investing in. It was the result of us going through a robust financial plan, finding out the client is meeting all of their metrics and all of the objectives from a rate of return standpoint, and then I would share the stories I'm excited about, or the companies that I'm excited about. And she very bluntly shared with me, she's an anesthesiologist in Southern Ontario, very, very straightforward, and shared with me, listen, I'm meeting those metrics. That's not what's important to me. What I'd like to better understand is what is the impact that my dollars are having on the world and the world around me. And so I took that candor back and I said, okay, how can I, let's try to build a portfolio that meets her objectives, financial objectives, but can also meet her societal goals and the core beliefs. She wanted a very environmentally friendly portfolio that also met some of her other ESG criteria. And so I took that away, and this is when the world of passive investing or investing with socially responsible means was relatively nascent. So there was a smaller number of options out there. So I went out and put on, my finance hat and tried to find the best product that met a good rate of return. And I came back to her and said, listen, I found this great product that meets all the, 5 stars on what the ESG scoring, but also does very well on the investment side, so that we can both be happy. So we started to dig through the product, and the top holdings, I'll never forget, Facebook was the #1 holding, followed by Google and Microsoft. And although those are great companies, she kind of looked at me and said, listen, I don't know if in her belief set, those were not companies that the way that they conducted themselves in the marketplace were aligned with her interests or her beliefs. And so she said, how about we go back to the drawing board? And what I found was that most of the investment products that are on the marketplace are exclusionary in nature. So what that means, exclusionary, is that you seek specific criteria, things like fossil fuels, tobacco, maybe alcohol, weapons, or maybe bad polluters, and you exclude them from the portfolio. So in the US alone, there's about 5,000 securities that we can buy. Out of those 5,000, generally about 250 get removed from when you do these exclusionary type screenings. So you're left with 4,750 companies to choose from and invest in. Okay, so that's the most common way that investors seek to match their beliefs with their portfolio, is by excluding the worst offenders. I'd like to share with you, though, that there's better ways to do that, which is what would be called selective-based investing. There's 3 things I'm going to talk about today: exclusionary, selective, and corporate activism. Selective investing is where you're actively looking for the companies that are behaving the most ethically. So as opposed to only excluding the worst and being left with the 4,750 companies that are remaining on the index, you can go a little bit deeper and say, well, why don't I invest in the best of the best, the ones that are really driving positive social change, and align my portfolio selectively. And selective investing can also be done with dietary changes, animal rights, religious skews, social progress. So those are all ways that you can skew your portfolio into matching your personal beliefs. There we go. The benefits of doing that, basically, it's an alignment with your values. So now you know your portfolio is matching your belief set. The theory here is that how you're bringing about change is that you're pressuring the companies into better corporate behavior. And you're doing that by avoiding their stock price or buying more of their stock. You're improving this. If you're avoiding them, you're hoping that it lowers their stock price and drives a higher cost of capital. Now, a lower stock price will translate to maybe more pressure on management, maybe them missing their bonus, and maybe then looking and saying, how come we're not doing so well in our stocks, and realizing that, well, a big component of the world is no longer willing to buy our shares, and so maybe it's time for us to change. Okay, same way with higher cost of capital. When companies want to engage in new projects, they need to raise capital for that. If you're, in the doghouse and no one's willing to lend you capital, you have to invest in your company. You tend to have to go higher and higher on how much return you're willing to offer as a part of that project, and so it sets the cost higher for those companies. That's the theory behind exclusionary and selective investing. Regrettably, what we've seen is that there's actually limited impact, especially on exclusionary-based investing. Now, remember that most studies are backwards looking, and so when we look at the meta studies that run from, let's say, 2009 to 2021, which is where we have the bigger data set, the impact has been relatively marginal. What's important to point out, though, is that this is relatively new. The UNPRI that Keegan mentioned earlier dates only from 2006. And the IFRS, which is where accounting firms are now reporting not only what are your profits, but also looking into and gathering data on your environmental, is relatively new. We're talking about a couple years only, okay? So this is a relatively new field. So sometimes backward-looking data is not necessarily the only thing that we want to gauge ourselves on. And for the interest of this study today, I sought a specific study on the extraction industry. And what there is a direct correlation, according to a study that was released in 2022, that extraction industries are now suffering for a higher cost of capital and depressed stock price compared to their peers, thanks in large part to the movement of exclusionary or selective-based investing. Okay, so these are certainly two of the tools that you have in your toolbox with regards to how you choose to invest. The next I'd like to talk about is corporate activism, which is the one that's shown to bear the most fruit. So, as an investment nerd, this is my world, the world of investing. In your worlds, primarily you're coming from the entry point of medicine. So as a reminder, a shareholder, when somebody talks about buying stocks or buying equities, or that 60% of your portfolio is on the stock market, what you're buying is the shares of a company. You're actually owning a chunk of the company. And as an owner of a company, you have a voice. Okay, and if you buy, one share of a very large multinational, you've got a very small voice. But as the voice at the table gets bigger through larger ownership or the merging of interests, shareholders coming together to have an impact, what we're seeing is that these shareholders are starting to effectuate change by being active as shareholders and actively voting and bringing about change through their motions inside of a company. So if we look at that from the lens of how would this happen, well, it's by exercising that voting right. So what we have is the shareholders, they name the board of directors. The board of directors appoints and monitors the company management, who then manages the day-to-day operations. So as a shareholder, by installing the board of directors or incentivizing the board of directors to also take into account more than just profitability, we start to see change come about. And so there's many of great examples of this, but very recently we have ExxonMobil, who in, I believe, 2022, a small hedge fund that owned 0.02% of the votes, gathered a large number of other investors that had similar concerns with ExxonMobil's methodology, and brought about change. Named 3 new board members that share the same long-term focus of, hey, if we go only short-term focus on fossil fuels, this company will not survive the next 30, 40, 50 years. And so we need to be thinking more strategically. We need to be thinking about renewable energy. And so this is a prime example of a small investor, gathering votes to bring about change inside of a company. Now, this is direct. We see the impact of these kind of changes. So very meaningful. Another great example would be Enea. This is a Polish company that was building, clean coal, and a group of activist investors took a pretty substantial position in this company. And launched a lawsuit against the management, saying that it was incredibly short-sighted of them to be invested in coal, and completely stopped the project. And so again, this is relatively new. This has happened in 2023, still ongoing in the courts, but a great example of shareholders exercising their voice to bring about change. Okay, so 3 key ways to bring about change: 1, excluding the worst; 2, rewarding the best; and 3, using your voice at the table to bring about change. And so once we've done those three things, it's important to then be able to measure what the impact of our portfolio is. And there's lots of different socially responsible specialist investors out there, and most of them put as much effort into reporting on the ESG as they do on performance. And that can include things like what's the relative carbon intensity of the companies we have in our portfolio compared to the index, or what's the carbon footprint? What's the weighted average of our ESG score? Or maybe the activist voting history. They're going to be tracking that and trying to determine, well, what kind of an impact can they have? Lastly, we have the implied temperature increase score, which is, again, on this Earth Day, something that we keep in forefront of the portfolios that we look for. Are we scoring well? Are we going to meet the 2030 and 2050 objectives for climate change? And how much of these companies are actively bringing about change in these areas? So these are all things that can be measured and then thus can be reported to you. Okay, so this is going to be a busy screen. I'm going to show you some examples of different ways that companies can report. At the bottom here, we have an ESG characteristic. It's telling us that we are outperforming 99% of our peers on the MSCI peers in the same investment on the ESG scoring. It's showing, how are we scoring on carbon intensity compared to our peers? What's the implied temperature increase with the current portfolio? On the right-hand side here, we have the weighted average carbon intensity. So what is our current portfolio compared to the index? And up top here, we have the environmental. What's the track record of voting? So how have this company exercised their voice? Okay, so again, measuring what matters. It's perfectly appropriate for you to be asking for more out of your portfolio. With that, I will pass it along to Julie Nichols, who will bring this right to your individual day-to-day and how you can bring about change.
Perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Fantastic. Dr. Blacklock, I love the climate hero. I want a t-shirt and I want to get them for a bunch of my friends so we can all work together towards that. So your choice of financial institution also has an impact. Canada's big banks are heavily invested in fossil fuels, despite their claim of reaching a net zero by 2050. So where does that leave us? So CIBC, Bank of Nova Scotia, TD, and National Bank have committed to this net zero emission by 2050, but all lack a concrete target to achieve that. They continue to fund fossil fuels significantly. RBC, being Canada's largest bank, fifth largest fossil fuel financer globally, hasn't reduced its target, even advocates for increasing production. So BMO, standing out from the pack, has set targets to reduce absolute emissions from oil and gas that they finance and are leaders in exclusionary-based investments that JF alluded to earlier. Credit unions appear to be a little bit more climate-friendly as well, with an option due to their smaller size and focus on local communities. Some even screen investments for environmental impact. So a fan of the smaller companies as well. Banks cannot achieve a net zero emission while continuing or even expanding fossil fuels, which is clearly incompatible with their climate goals. So how to take action as an individual? Well, you can engage directly. Ask your current bank what their plans are to reduce their fossil fuel financing. This message is that you care and can raise awareness internally. You can also switch banks. Consider moving your business to a financial institution with a stronger commitment to sustainability. This is a powerful way for you to disapprove or to support the positive change. Public pressure, so social media, letters to the editor can raise awareness and put pressures on the banks. Going beyond fossil fuels, ESG practices, don't just focus on the fossil fuel divestment. Look for a bank with strong overall environmental, social, and governance practices. This could include investing in renewable energy, supporting social causes, or having good governance structures. By taking these steps, you can force a change in the financial sector and encourage banks to prioritize a sustainable future. Remember, due diligence, though, is crucial before making a change for a bank. You want to make sure that they're a strong financial institution and they align with your values that they offer and the services that you have for your banking needs as well. Before diving into social responsible investing, sorry, next slide, it's crucial to how you bring it down to as an investor. This is one of my concerns. So I'm taking this lead very personal moving forward with my career path because I find it's a very, very important for our children, our future, for every child, for the children, obviously. So before diving into social responsible investing, it's crucial to consider several key factors that will influence your overall investment strategy and your ability to earn and to meet the investments and retirement objectives that define a comprehensive financial plan. So here's a breakdown of some points that are important. While SRIs are focused on social environment and impact, your overall financial goals are still paramount. Are you aiming for capital appreciation, so growth of a portfolio, income generation, which would include dividends and interest income, or a balance of both? Don't forget the tax implications as well. Understanding your objectives will help you tailor your social responsible investment portfolio. Your appetite for risk is also important. Some investments carry more risk than others, so consider how comfortable you are with potential market downturn and how it might impact your sleep. SRI options can range from relative conservative portfolio or growth orientated, so there is some flexibility as well. You have to look at short-term versus long-term investment. Are you saving for a short-term goal, like a down payment on a house, like a 1 to 2 year term, or a longer term, am I looking to fund my investment 10 to 15, 20 years potentially? Time horizon significantly impacts investment choice. Short term might require a lower risk option like green bonds, while longer term can benefit from potentially higher returning stocks, including the SRI options. There's no conclusive evidence or relative with the under or over performance when focusing on SRIs. So you're not sacrificing return when you're looking at adding this to your portfolio. Remember, SRIs are just one piece of the puzzle. You can build a diversified portfolio that considers both your financial goals and your core values. Working with a certified financial planner to build a personal financial plan can help you give guidance today and over your lifetime as an investor. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julie. So we wanted to make sure we left some time for questions. And so with that, Dr. Blacklock, we can gladly share the screen with you again and open it up for anybody who might have questions on how they can use their financial means to bring about change either within their portfolio, in their banking, in their insurance, or any of the other items that they might want to chat about. We also have, we'll be circulating a slide deck with some of the more robust sources and a couple of resources that you might find interesting that we thought would be good to share with you as well.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. I had a question myself, one which was what online resources could our audience go to refresh themselves on what they've heard and to understand better the environmental aspects of their finance and investing better. So I hope that we can find a way to make that last slide available to our audience. Maybe it can go up on the website or something. We'll have to see about that. But all righty. I cannot see our audience, so I'm not sure. Amanda, can you see them? Gina, can you see them? Do we have any hands up? If you have a question for our speakers today, raise your hand or even just speak up. Okay, well, while the audience is giving it some thought, I'm going to put out a question then. Obviously, there's probably no such thing as a perfect company in the world, and companies might have strengths in their social ethics. They might have strengths in their governance, and some of them might have strengths in their environmental mandate. How do we balance out this tripod of ESG? And do we really need a separate sort of way of evaluating environmental responsibility that is not part of ESG?
Keegan, I can gladly start us off. For some reason, someone timed some construction with us exactly as we're having this conversation. So hopefully you're not hearing drills through my mic. But on my side, it's a great question, and I think it boils down to the individual and where they would specifically like to bring about change. I think what's very exciting now is because IFRS has really pushed the data reporting and data collection, we can actually tailor portfolios that hit the specific metrics that someone has that are near and dear to them. One of the data sets that we look at, for example, is, is this a company that's heavily financing political action committees? What's the discrepancy in wage between the CEO and the average worker? What's the makeup of the board or the executive, both from a racial or gender perspective? So the metrics are there now, right? So it's a lot easier for us to have really meaningful conversations with our clients when it comes to the selective part of the portfolio. And I think that should be the case for most individuals that you're engaging with.
Sure. So added to that, I got 2 points to mention. I say, one, absolutely, we do need to have a secondary evaluation platform out there, because if for anything, people get really emotional about the environment and these social issues. And when it comes to being emotional, you do never want to be emotional about your investments. You don't want to be emotional about anything financial, anything numbers related. And what this does is this allows a quantifiable way for people to see numerically how a company is performing when it comes to environmental performance, social performance, ESG. And then secondly, I would have to say that outside of the emotional aspect, we really need to have a way to monitor the integrity of these companies. So while I think we all would love to be able to believe that having a Coke and a smile is all that we need to believe that the company is green, we need to be able to have an ability to dig deeper into what companies are saying. Well, because companies are always going to be profit driven, I think one of the biggest issues, or one of the biggest talking points of late, is when you start looking at Elon Musk. He always comes up with this, and Tesla. Tesla actually scores very low, and they actually got kicked off of a platform, not because they performed badly. It's because that what they're doing, even though the momentum and what they're trying to do and change is huge. Them as a company they're not quite clean enough, because you think manufacturing anything from any car is very energy intensive, even though they use lots of solar panels and they control pretty much their whole supply chain. We need to have, as consumers and investors, we need to have a way to be able to say, okay, great, I love that they're doing that, but right now I need to see how your company impacts the environment, how they impact their labor force, and how are they governed. So I think that those are the two big issues. Take the emotion out of it, and then just have a better way to monitor these companies.
Thank you. Gina, have we any questions from the audience at all at this point?
We have no comments, no questions, but we do have a comment thanking you for the very informative presentation.
Thank you. Well, I have another question ready. So Jean-Francois, you and I had a conversation a couple of months ago about the issue of fossil fuel divestment. We had one of our first year NOSM medical students was actually involved in a fossil fuel divestment movement, complete with sit-ins on another campus in years gone by. And we talked about the merits and the challenges of fossil fuel divestment as a goal. Would you like to share some of what you told me at the time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, fossil fuel divestment, as I pointed out earlier, it can be very difficult to ensure that none of the companies in which you invest have no subsidiaries that have any true exposure to fossil fuels. So I'll give you an example. Microsoft is a great large conglomerate who does all kinds of different businesses below the surface of the software that we know and use. Same with a company like Johnson & Johnson. So those are those types of how close to true fossil fuel zero are we getting? That's one element. The other element is that exclusionary-based investing, out of the three that I shared, is actually the least effective. The most effective form of bringing about change or driving change is with activism. And activism can take, as you mentioned, the sit-in is definitely one way to be active in the conversation. But as an owner of that company, driving change from the board of directors downward, what we're now seeing is these very large entities like BlackRock, which is the largest investor in the world. It's not one individual. It's actually everybody who buys these low-cost passive investments often will be using a BlackRock style product. BlackRock is now owning larger and larger chunks of these companies and looking to bring about change from the inside. So I think that's an interesting perspective that for a lot of people, they think that by avoiding the company, they're absolutely matching their values, but they're not necessarily bringing about change. So the number one way to bring about change is actually from the inside as a shareholder. Obviously, that depends on your size and on the size of the stick that you get to play with at that boardroom table, but it's really rewarding to see these really high-level players that are bringing about change, empowered by the data that the IFRS is now bringing forward to us.
Most of us are probably relatively small investors. Do we actually have much power at any of those tables?
It's a great question. And as an individual, I would say that selective investing is where you're going to go furthest. But I think that's where, again, to Julie's point, selecting the firms that you're partnering with and keeping those firms accountable is quite important. In many cases, people seek their financial advice from the big banks or a big bank subsidiary, okay? And so having a look a little bit deeper into how the portfolio is operated, requesting reports on those items, requesting reports on their corporate activism. Like, that's not an impossible ask to see, well, have you actually been voting and exercising your right to vote? And if that company is not doing that, well, maybe ask around and see what else is out there. There's certainly specialist investments that is part of their MO, being activist investors on top of being selective in the way that they bring about change.
Okay, and if a financial advisor recommends a fossil fuel-free fund, like just for example, the MD Management offers one. We have probably a lot of physicians or health professionals in this audience who may be making use of a company like that. How seriously should we take that claim that a fund is fossil fuel free?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Keegan, with your permission, or Julie. I welcome both your thoughts on this, but from my perspective, I think that's where the exclusionary screening is tremendously helpful. So you're taking 5,000 companies, you're limiting 100, you feel great about it, and I don't want to take away from that. What I'm suggesting is that it's not necessarily the method that's going to bring about the most change, but it's still, again, aligned with your interests. With regards to their claim, Julie might know more about the fossil free fund than I do. But yeah, Keegan or Julie, do you want to weigh in on this?
Every fund reports on a fun fact. So if you're looking to get more detail, the fun fact will list everything there. And I think it's definitely a pure play if you're looking to do something that's fossil free within the portfolio from an equity perspective and a fixed income perspective. So they had the two funds. One was equity driven, so stock, and then it was fixed income, so the bonds, the same proportion.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as far as I think as far as an investor wanting to be selective, I think that's the biggest thing is you need to be precise. So just like if someone's familiar with say AI or ChatGPT, the more precise you are with your prompts, same with your investing. You need to be able to say, if I just want to be totally clean, we need to be a little bit more specific to that. Does that mean that we're trying to exclude oil and gas, or are we trying to exclude everybody that has carbon emissions, significant carbon emissions? So I think it's just a matter of investors digging a little bit deeper, but it's a lot easier nowadays than it was even 5-10 years ago for you to be able to say, hey, I want to be able to just invest in the EV movement, or I want to invest in a social change. So just because it's much more popular now and there's much more data available. So yeah.
and financial products, the range of financial products that are available on the market, both in Canada and the US, and how well they can do, specifically at bringing about change or reducing footprint. It goes way beyond, one or two options now. That's definitely been a part of the market that's grown. Interestingly and selfishly, when I look at investments, every investment is always looked at through the lens of what's going to be the future rate of return from a pure investment standpoint. What we have now is the world's largest pension funds. The people with the biggest stick have made commitments to move away from fossil fuels and to move away from carbon intensive industries. And so that's kind of like, playing poker with someone who's showing you their hand. You know where this big money is going into the future. And so for me, I feel very comfortable with those types of investments, even though the backwards looking data may not necessarily support that there's a ton of change being brought about. The rate of returns being similar backwards looking. When I look forward, I think that I'm very optimistic that we could actually see outperformance by means of our socially responsible investing guidelines, which is very encouraging.
Okay, well, we've got 8 minutes left, and I'm going to wrap up this little segment. Thank you very much, Jean-Francois and Keegan and Julie, for joining us today and for sharing your many insights. Now, back in 2020, there was a group of health professionals, and they included Courtney Howard. Some of you may have heard of Courtney Howard. She's an emerge doc from Yellowknife. And this group of health professionals published a commentary in The Lancet, and it was called A Pledge for Planetary Health to Unite Health Professionals in the Anthropocene. And the idea was to create something akin to an update of the Hippocratic Oath for all health professionals, taking into account the many environmental challenges we face in the 21st century that presumably weren't issues for Hippocrates back in the 4th century BCE. So today we're going to put up a shorter version of the pledge. This version can be found on the Planetary Health Alliance website if you're looking for it in the future. And I'm going to put out a challenge to NOSM University going forward to make this pledge a part of the graduation ceremony for all our NOSM grads. But in the meantime, I'd like to invite you, all of you in the audience, to make this planetary health pledge with me today. Amanda, could you put it up? There we are. Planetary Health Pledge. I, as a health professional, solemnly pledge to work to protect the health of people, their communities, and the planet. I pledge to maintain the utmost respect for human life and the diversity of life on Earth and for the natural systems which support all life. I pledge to advocate for equity and justice by actively addressing environmental, social, and structural determinants of health, envisioning a transition to a society that places the well-being of all persons in balance with nature at its heart. I pledge to address the climate and ecological crisis in my actions at home, in my community, and in my profession, to protect the planet and all of its life forms for current and future generations. And so as we close this little celebration, I'll just remind you of what's on the front of my t-shirt. Thanks again to Nell. My legacy is your destiny. And when I use the term your, we're speaking of the young in the world. We're speaking of our children in some cases. We're speaking of our high school students, of our university students, and all those who've really not been around long enough to have been able to maybe make change when it would have been better to do so 2 or 3 decades ago. Anyway, and as speaking as someone who just caught the tailwinds of the baby boom myself, I feel that really we older people do owe the young a legacy. So I really want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you learned something. I hope you felt a little bit inspired to maybe take a look at your banking, at your finances, and at your investment strategies, and ask yourself whether environmental considerations, social justice, and equity are part of your strategy. So that will wrap things up for today. And again, thank you for joining us. Have yourself a great Earth Day.